Right. I just wouldn't do it. You know, it's just,
We all set? Okay, so now is the time for our features. And tonight we're so happy to have Olivia and Juliet here. We'll be starting with Olivia Cerrone, who is the author of The Hunger Saint, a historical novella, winner of the Crab Orchard Review's Jack Dyer Fiction Prize. She's currently completing Displaced, which won the 2022 Novel Slices Contest and was longlisted for both the Disquiet Literary Prize and the Masters Review Novel Excerpt Contest. Olivia.
Thank you so much. So I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight, and a wonderful and very talented open mic readers. And it's such an honor to read with you, Juliet. I love your work so much. And I just want to give a very special thanks to Julia and Jen for everything that you do in supporting and making this such a wonderful community. So I'm going to read an excerpt from the historical section of my novel, Displaced. By June of 1958, families began disappearing from the West End. Buildings emptied, the tenants forced from their homes. Children no longer played in the streets. Gone were the shopkeepers and the men with their push carts peddling their wares. Joseph's elementary school closed for good, with fourth grade resuming at St. Mary's nearby in the North End neighborhood that following September. He collected the forwarding addresses of friends who promised to stay in touch. The eviction deadline loomed ever closer by the month's end. His own family's next residence remained unknown. Despite the relatives who'd offered to host them, his mother had declined each invitation. She fought with his father most nights, unwilling to accept the failure of the committee to obtain a temporary injunction, halting the redevelopment. Even then, she believed that the legal system could save them. The Boston Housing Authority wasted no time in tearing down those buildings on the fringes of the neighborhood, transforming the West End into open cavities of space. The Charles River sparkled between fat heaps of gray debris and rooftop shingles. Cranes with wrecking balls advanced along the streets. Bulldozer engines growled. Everywhere thundered demolition sounds, the destruction hidden behind tall chimney-top buildings not yet torn apart. Still, his father worked. Michael continued his apprenticeship, trekking across what remained with the masonry tools fastened around him. Joseph's mother insisted on rallying the last of their fellow holdouts, walking him and Michael to church on Sundays with Save the West End flyers tucked into canvas bags for distribution. The pamphlets documented stories of injustice, how some West Enders had their utilities cut off while others experienced mysterious fires set in certain residencies to burn people out, one claiming the life of an elderly Polish woman. Demolition workers had even slammed their wrecking balls against buildings to scare those living inside. Joseph wondered what threats awaited Pitt Street. He clutched his mother's hand as they navigated passages of ruin, towering mounds of jagged wood beams and concrete rubble banked either side of the decimated streets, now wide dirt roads devoid of their brick row houses. Acres of neighborhood had been leveled. Occasional remaining streetlights appeared like black, disfigured skeletons. The enormity of space disorientated Joseph. He felt certain that they'd soon lose their way without the familiar landmarks of storefronts with their steel pulled down grates and street corners forever occupied by groups of young and old men alike. A stink of burning oil settled inside his nose. Dust swirled through the air, yellowing the sleeves and collars of their cleanest white shirts, pressed slacks, and ties. Michael trailed behind, glancing back toward the occasional muffled explosions in the near distance, forever drawn to trouble. Their parents had warned them about the sudden dangers of the demolition sites, falling debris and reckless bulldozers, to name a few. His mother feigned indifference to the noises, beaming a determined smile beneath her white sunglasses and blue kerchief pinned in a careful arrangement over her bouffant. She greeted passing West Enders, women in long skirts and heels, men in crisp suit jackets, and handed flyers to all. One couple, the Cataldos, who once owned a small 5-and-dime store on Barton Street, questioned the absence of Joseph's father. In bed with a fever, better he sleeps it off, his mother lied. His parents fought nonstop at home over his father's refusal to accompany them to church, too disturbed by the neighborhood's dismantling. Might make him worse being out here in all this bad air. Mr. Cataldo shook his head at the sight of an 18-wheeler lumbering forward a few streets ahead. Black smoke clouds emanated from the exhaust pipes atop its red cab. All these years, I couldn't run my business on Sundays because of the blue laws, but now the city can go on like this. Mrs. Cataldo rubbed the slender bridge of her nose, as if also affected by the dust and fumes. She folded her mother's flyer in half without reading it. We're leaving tomorrow, staying with my brother's family in Medford. Joseph's mother nodded. A lot of people are heading there. When are you folks leaving? Why should we? Our building's still standing, isn't it? Their neighbors exchanged a pitying glance before Mrs. Cataldo squinted at Joseph's mother through her thick cat-eye glasses. Oh, Julia, who are you kidding? His mother's smile faded, but she pressed on with kindness, not one to lose face. We could stop them tomorrow if we wanted to. If enough of us organized together, stood outside our homes, put our bodies in front of those bulldozers, and shouted, enough. Mrs. Cataldo smiled now. Would it really change anything if we did? I heard what happened with that protest on City Hall you and Myra Horowitz invited us to. The only people who showed up were the organizers. We still have rights, his mother said, insistent, her face reddening. The committee will see to it that every last West Ender is rehoused as a community as promised. We've already appealed to the city and by the time the case is heard, the West End will be cleared out. How can you go on like this, dragging those poor boys around, trying to stop the inevitable? Look around yourself. Joseph shrank from the adults, their voices becoming more heated as they argued over the neighborhood's inability to resist as a community. Sudden carnival melodies floated in the air. He pulled away from his mother toward Marino, the hurdy-gurdy man, who appeared along the street, pushing a large ornate cart forward as he churned the long handle of a box-shaped instrument, cranking out a syncopated air, the music loud and infectious. He was a short, smiling man, never without his thick horn-rimmed spectacles and a tan fedora. Those around Joseph, including his mother and the Cataldos, gazed at the organ grinder and hushed. Smiles stretched across faces. Marino's presence was a strange and cheerful shock, heralding, as he always did, the coming festivities of summer, the Saints' Day feasts, 4th of July fireworks, and parades led by exuberant brass bands. Perhaps he offered this, his last performance for the West End, as a tribute to the final holdouts. What happy memories might survive if music filled the streets. As he passed, Charlie Kowalski hobbled toward them, muttering, damn shame. He wore the same ill-fitting gray flannel suit to church each week, but today his dress shirt hung loose, unbuttoned and disheveled from beneath the wrinkled lapels of his jacket, exposing portions of his chest and limp belly. His white hair stuck up, uncombed. His face appeared gaunt, a ring of shadows around his eyes. You okay, Mr. Kowalski? Michael said. The man grunted, incoherent. His wheezing breath stank of beer and onions as he leaned toward Joseph and his brother. They resisted any cruel urge to mock him. Everyone in the neighborhood showed a particular kindness toward Mr. Kowalski, who'd lived alone since his wife's passing some years ago. He served in World War I and often spent warm evenings sitting outside in his calamine pink lawn chair, drinking Schultz beer and trading casual remarks with anyone who passed by. If you hung around long enough, you'd hear him speak of the Aragon forest in France and mustard gas burns, how his lungs had never quite recovered from battle, nor his right leg still harboring bits of shrapnel lodged inside bone. A goddamn shame, he said. Joseph knew what Mr. Kowalski lamented, the tall stone World War I memorial set to be raised, along with everything else in Adams Square. He'd passed it many times, walking along Washington Street with his friends, a young woman dressed in long classical robes with the names of men, including one of Mr. Kowalski's brothers, inscribed beneath, in the glory of their youth we shall remember them. A demolition blast roared closer than before. Mr. Kowalski dove to the ground, yanking Joseph with him. Down, down! He landed hard against his ribcage, the impact winding him. Michael forced apart the old man's grip. Let him go. He pulled Joseph up, whose forearms tingled, the elbows streaked with dirt and blood where he'd torn skin in the fabric of his shirt. The crowd gathered around Mr. Kowalski, who hugged the earth, dry heaving, braced for the artillery shells that flew across his mind. Others tried to coax him into steadying his breath. They failed to lift him to his feet. Snap out of it, buddy. Come back to us now. Better get a doctor. His mother appeared beside Joseph, pulling up his sleeve to inspect his wounds. You'll be okay. That poor old man is out of his mind. She instructed Michael to take him home to bandage his cuts, change into a clean dress shirt, and hurry back. Joseph followed his brother to Pitt Street. Never saw him like that before. Michael shrugged. He's a loony. Surprised he didn't crack up any sooner. They cut down another uncertain stretch of dirt and rubble that led farther from home. Joseph shivered. You know where you're going, right? Of course I do. His brother hurried toward an untouched row of buildings. I want to see what's going on first. What about church? We'll be quick. You gonna wimp out? No. Black smoke clouds extended in bulbous pillars over the flat rooftops ahead. They crossed onto the remains of Poplar Street, passing the blue-stripped awning of Kaplan's Groceries, its darkened storefront windows empty, an iron grate locked over the door, then turned another corner and entered the site. Small clusters of men in white hard hats with black diamond-shaped insignias worked inside a clearing the length of a city block, edged in towering mounds of dirt and brick. Dump trucks and bulldozers combed through the area, their wide tracks leaving deep impressions through the ravaged earth. A tall, contained inferno stood at a corner of the demolition field, providing the origin of smoke and odor. Joseph cupped a hand over his nose and mouth, retching at the acrid stench of burnt rubber and chemical waste. This way, Michael said, moving toward the flames. They hid behind tall refuse piles, traversing the shadows of abandoned row houses lining the perimeter. Blown-out windows shone like gaping sockets. Joseph's eyes watered from the burning smoke. Strange explosions thundered from the great blazing fire pit. Joseph shouted at Michael to slow down, but the roar of trucks and bulldozer engines devoured his voice. Then his brother halted toward a towering mound of dirt and rubble, squatting low as he peeked over to one side. Joseph huddled behind him, following his careful movements. Heat warmed his nose and forehead. The inferno rose to the height of a small building, and they crouched not 10 feet away from it. Bulldozers gathered debris from nearby mounds, emptying piles at the foot of the fire. Muffled explosions cracked the air, causing sudden plumes of flames to ignite. Joseph caught a pungent whiff of gasoline and trembled hard, fearing sudden combustion. Michael pointed out a pair of shirtless men standing atop a dump truck while a tall crane worked above them, spilling more rubble into the pile they worked from. The men pulled out chunks of iron and steel, pipes and cast iron radiators from the dirt. Joseph didn't notice the bulldozer that rumbled toward them until Michael screamed and grasped his shoulder. They scurried away from the machine's dragging teeth as it hauled what it could into the burning pit. They ran, breathless, until reaching Pitt Street. In the last weeks before their exile, his mother harvested what remained of their rooftop garden and purchased fish and cheese from the crowded Haymarket stands. Her kitchen gushed with rich scents, a barrier against the noise of destruction that continued long into the day and the latest gossip about the committee's recent dissolution, its leadership uncertain after much bickering and infighting among its members, which his mother refused to discuss. Their next move remained unclear. Steaming platters, fragrant with garlic, adorned his family's small table one evening. An antipasto of grilled sardines, lemons, and oregano, calamari stuffed with breadcrumbs, fennel, grated pecorino, raisins, and pine nuts, alongside bowls of redinette pasta tossed with ricotta and sauteed cauliflower. They ate with a dogged intensity, the meal an immediate relief, though soon the noises outside became harder to ignore, and a new argument began. What should I tell them when they find out about what you've done? His mother said. Joseph's father threw his fork against his plate. Now we have to discuss this? When else? The boys have a right to know. He ground his teeth together, his facial muscles twitching as his jaw sawed back and forth in consideration. Your sister Donna said we could stay with them until we got settled. What else is there for them to know? Yes, settled near family, not some empty lot in the middle of nowhere. Across the river from Southie isn't nowhere. But who do we know there? No one. Well, he said, throwing up his hands with a shrug. They can visit us, no? Once we sign the papers, we own the land. Then we can build a house that no one can take from us. It's the best I could do, Julia. You want to be a tenant the rest of your life, living in another slum? They fought long into the night, revealing what Joseph had long anticipated. They'd received a notice that Pitt Street would be demolished in less than 3 weeks. Their expulsion came earlier than expected. One Tuesday morning, after their father had left for work, and Joseph and his brother sat in the kitchen eating bacon and eggs, a fist hammered at their door, followed by a loud, brutish shout. Everybody out! City orders! You got 2 hours! Joseph's mother set her coffee cup down upon the red checkered tablecloth with a definitive clink and rose. Stay here a moment. Don't anyone move. She smoothed down the wrinkles of her yellow housecoat and left the apartment, an immediate clamor of frenzied voices and baby wails escaping through the doorway. The surrounding walls thrummed with movement and alarm, a cacophony of languages, Italian, Yiddish, and Polish shot orders from stairways and bedrooms. Joseph bit his trembling lips, willing himself not to cry. Now they'd be thrown out into the streets, forced to abandon all their possessions with no place to go. Michael went to the open window above the sink, straining for a glimpse of the demolition crew outside. Soon their mother returned, the door slamming, her voice breathless as she entered the kitchen. None of this is legal. What they're doing, we won't let them. Not this time. She blinked hard at Joseph and Michael. Get dressed, boys. We stop this now. No time for questions. Joseph hurried after his brother into the bedroom they shared, trading their pajamas for jeans and t-shirts, getting their shoes on and half-tied before their mother shouted new commands. Joseph's pulse sprinted as they followed her outside. They stood to either side of their mother, blocking the front entrance of their building. A bulldozer waited close by, its engines growling low and steady. Neighbors crowded across the street, having vacated their buildings, and now gestured toward Joseph, convinced, perhaps, that his mother had finally lost it. Another demolition explosion bellowed, drowning out their shouts as tremors rocked the earth. Joseph's ears began to ring. Red brick row houses collapsed at the far end of the road, turning Pitt Street to rubble. His mother lifted her small pointed chin and squeezed his hand tight. Here they come now. Don't move. An enormous crane rolled into view. Its skyscraper neck left Joseph breathless. The workmen herded away his neighbors from the demolition site. Then the crane pivoted toward a different building across the street. Its long steel chain lifted the wrecking ball, catching sunlight as it rose backwards before the metal spear swung forward and rushed against the roof, exploding shingles. A thunderclap boomed, followed by an immediate crash as one side of the building imploded. Smoke clouds hung sideways, leaving an oily film across the sky as they vanished. Joseph's mouth burned, a taste of ashes settled in his throat. His eyes watered. He blinked hard, the tears spilling over into his lips. The men who operated the machines turned their faces away, absorbed in the destruction. Joseph trembled, his limbs becoming rubber. Mom, they can't see us. They can't see us. He tried to pull away, but her hold remained steady, locked over him, her nails pinching skin. Michael stared ahead, entranced, his face calm and sure. Somehow, their mother's voice rose above the deafening roar of the engines. They'll stop. They have no choice but to stop. The crane turned toward them, the wrecking ball pulling into its pendulum swing. Thank you.
Oh, Olivia. Oh, Jen and I are both kind of privileged to see different little parts of this novel in process, and I had no idea how far it had come, Olivia. Anyway, okay. So it's my pleasure to introduce Juliet Graves, who also takes my breath away. She wrote The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna. It's been shortlisted for the New England Book Award and the Connecticut Book Award. And it won the Cetraro Prize for Southern Italian Literature. I think it's been translated, how many? 10 languages. Should I name them? French, German, that's all I know so far. Italian. Her second novel, The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia. Chionia.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's me telling someone to stop talking, but not me. Say it again.
Santa Chionia.
Santa Chionia will be published by Knopf in summer 2024. So 2 fantastic novels will be going to.
So that's a dreadful act to have to follow, but that was so right. The specificity of the historical detail, like down to what kind of beard. That's me. I can't wait to read the rest of that. But before I start, I just want to say how inspired I am by this group. This is the second time I've had the privilege of reading here, and I'm not a Boston person. I drove in from Rhode Island for this, but I was telling my old friend here as we were sitting in Cafe Victoria before I came over, I just think that the way you all support one another and the generosity with which you come out for other artists and the bravery that you get up here and read, which is actually really hard. I'm just so impressed. Thank you to Juliet and to Jen. I'm so grateful to have crossed your paths. And thank you to this amazing bookstore, because this is, not the fact of this space, in this economy, to keep a bookstore open is a feat, but also to offer it to us on a busy night so that, we can have a cultural hub. It's amazing. So thank you all for your service to literature. And I'm just so grateful to be here. Excuse me. So this is, in fact, my novel that's coming out next June, I hope. I just delivered it to my editor. It's not final, it's in editing, and it's never been read from before. So thank you all for letting me take it. It's called The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia, and I'm going to read the opening, and then I'm going to skip forward once you know what it's about a little bit. So, okay. The cataclysm of 1960, the flood that would exhume the unidentified skeleton buried in the Santa Chionia Piazza and precipitate the final rewriting of the village's fate, began on October 11th, 6 weeks after I arrived with my nursery school charter and my relentless idealism. What were the odds that a well-meaning American bluestocking like myself would be living amongst these secretive, tireless people on the lone occasion that a calamity, such a common occurrence, forced evidence of bloody murder to light? It's hard, looking back, to not see the price of my interference. Of course, that's not exactly fair. The responsibility for that murder can hardly be laid at my feet, even if I am partially to blame for what unfolded after the corpse's discovery. But life's not exactly fair, is it, Francesca? In my defense, I will say that I did what I thought was right at the time, or at least the closest I could manage under the circumstances. I was the sole non-native witness to the watershed moment in Santa Chionia's history, the end of 900 years of browbeaten stoicism. The other witnesses, native, naturally, and therefore with multitudinous and compelling reasons to decline to testify, have in the 60 years since all joined the majority. They have nothing to lose anymore by my bearing witness. Neither do I. Nothing to lose and nothing to fear, not for their reputations, nor from them. I have waited this long. I suppose I could have taken the true story of the lost boy of Santa Chionia to the grave, the way so many good Calabrian women have taken their secrets. Women like Chica Casile, like Emilia Volonta, like Donna Adelina Alvaro. But I have never been a good Calabrian woman. The village of Santa Chionia flooded every autumn, my landlady Chica told me as we watched the flood waters churn down our alley, barricading us in her little cement house. Santa Chionia had flooded this way since the Saracens and the Greeks had battled each other for the fertile valleys below. October would come and the rain would pound the Aspromonte Massif, slaloming through the streets for a few soggy, burbling days, topping up the summer empty cistern and causing the mountain to bloom with mushrooms. For 900 years, this battle-hardened people had battened down for the ordeal and then cleaned up when the storm had passed. Life went on, as life always did, unless it didn't. But something had changed after the war. The weather patterns, like a few other things, had taken a turn for the worst. The autumn rains no longer glided harmlessly through the village, but boiled into landslides, sluicing through stone walls, rocking foundations in their mortar sockets like teeth in a geriatric shepherd's loose gums. The day the rain began, October 11th, I had been impressed by its volume. It became annoying on the second day, as it settled into unbearable puddles, and the smell of unemptiable chamber pots permeated the kitchen. It had taken me, daughter of privilege, 3 days to understand that the rain was terrifying, that help was not coming, that help could not get here. You see what it's like now, Chica said as the flood roared down the packed dirt footpaths, capturing broom mattresses, ricotta molds, and honking black pigs, ricocheting off residences before bursting through the city wall and plunging into the ravine. It's because of your American bombs, she explained, her "your" sticky with undeserved forgiveness. Chica Castile was a somewhat insane, generally disagreeable woman of approximately 5 feet in height, who wore her steel gray hair in a short masculine pompadour. You knocked down one of the cliffs that used to hold back the floodwaters. This, like many of Chica's assertions, did not necessarily hold up to interrogation. No one else remembered the Americans ever bombing this part of the Aspromonte. But Chica relished being offended by me and my large-footed, immodest Yankee ways. And I recognized it was within my power to bestow a small joy on her dingy, combative little life by letting her be offended. After 4 days of being locked together in a fog of increasingly personal aromas, Chica and I managed to suppress our mutual antipathy and to pass the time together. Night and day had been suspended in the interminable pounding and the howling half dark, and I felt I might be going mad. We sat with a sap lamp burning between us in her second-floor salon, redolent with the wet dog smell of rennet. Even over that, I caught the oily scent of Chica's scalp, peachily visible in the space between her rather far-flung follicles. We stared perversely out her house's single glass window as if we were watching the evening news. Not that Chica had ever imagined such an object as a television. The glass creaked in the window frame. The roof of old Gerasimo's house below us, only 40 feet away, was invisible, except when the wind blew through so fiercely that it cut open the wall of water. What if roofs collapse? I was picturing the decrepitude of Sant'Antonia's lower valleys. If this goes on much longer, people will die. Of course they will die. How could they not? Chica shouted over the clobbering of the rain. Maybe we will all die this time. When the sky cleared, the flood of 1960 only left behind one corpse, and it had already been dead a long time. An enigma, nothing but bones. Beginning with the femur, I watched 2 boys pull from the rubble of the destroyed post office on Monday, October 17th. It was not uncommon to find a femur among the shrubs, for the feral white cows that clambered over the mountain footpaths were clumsy and often plummeted to their deaths in the ravine. But this was not a cow femur. Even I, city girl, knew by some atavistic instinct, my blood spooking through my veins as the boy climbed out of the tumbled stonework, brandishing his find like a pine resin torch. His shouts carried brightly through the windless mountain morning. The men who would be called upon to solve big problems in the village were all within earshot, and they began to trickle into the piazza to see what the commotion was. I shall enumerate them so that you may decide which of them you consider suspect when the time comes that we learn that there had indeed been a murder. I hope you did better than I did. First to arrive, dapper in his burgundy jacket, was the proprietor of the shop tavern, Kitty Corner. He had only to cross the piazza. Then the sallow, black-coated municipal secretary, followed by the mayor, who was in the last weeks of his re-election campaign and was very much about town. So was the communist challenger, who canvassed in the piazza every morning. The one traffic cop probably should have been there, but was not. However, there were 2 aging roustabouts I recognized because they were always in front of the tavern, as if they never had anywhere else to be, no goats to tend or gardens to till. The taller was easily spotted in any crowd because of his ears, which stuck out like the handlebars of a bicycle. And of course, there was Don Tito the Wolf, Lico, who had always been there and always would be, long after Sant'Antionia had seen its last of me. Hanging back in the alley was the village's tawny stray dog, who watched with his black eyes bulging and his too long tongue hanging out of his port side jaw, where it had dried into a stiff and cracking black fossil. The gathering included no females, not even the dog. Meanwhile, the curtains on every balcony window trembled in the fervent breath of invisible spectators. Santa Chiunia is a matriarchy. Don Pantaleone Bianco, the village priest, had told me, do not be confused by our machismo. It is women who have all the power in the family, and the family is everything here. Don Pantaleone himself appeared at the wreckage of the post office only moments later. He must have come running all the way from the rectory, but he bore no sign of exertion. One more of his suspicious charismas. I watched from my shutter shadow as the scene played out like a silent film. There was deliberation. Then Mayor Stella and the priest followed Pino, the municipal secretary, back to the town hall, where I could only assume he placed a phone call to the Carabinieri station 3 hours away in Bova, whose police unit serviced all the interior Aspromonte villages. Saverio Legato, the boutique proprietor, reluctantly returned to his shop, but the other men stood guard until the remains were collected by the proper authorities. At that moment, in my sheltered and orderly life, the idea that the proper authorities might not be the police did not cross my mind. I went back to work with my usual single-mindedness, never imagining that the only person who would ever investigate the skeleton circumstances would be me. So that's the setup. Spoiler, it's a mystery novel. I really wanted to write about Calabria in this period. I wanted to write about the depopulation of many of the villages that our ancestors came from. And I wanted to write a mystery novel because I love mystery novels. So that's what you've got. I'm going to read one more scene from deep in the book. What you need to know is that after the skeleton surfaces, an elderly woman approaches Francesca and says, 40 years ago, my 15-year-old son emigrated to America and never came home. I think it was all a lie and that he didn't emigrate because he never sent money. And I think he may be the body under the post office. Can you help me prove it? So, sorry, wrong. Here we go. On Friday morning, Chica and I set out for Melito in the coolness of dawn to look for Dante Nazareno, the immigration agent who had booked missing Leo Romeo's passage to America 40 years earlier. It was 2 hours to the closest bus stop in Rocaporte. We descended via the treacherous, dried mud of the path the women used to fetch water from the Fiumara. Chica's sturdy old legs were always 2 paces too quick for me. In Rocaforte's central piazza, Chica cagily slipped me a dried chestnut as we waited for the bus among strangers. My saddle shoes, which had been my best bet at the beginning of the day, were pressing ominously on my swollen toes. I scoured the panorama for any evidence that due north, behind an undisclosable number of gullies and glens, was Santa Chiunia. The bus was packed. The route from the mountain villages to the commercial center at Melito ran only twice a day. For 2.5 hours, we bumped down the switchbacks, my life flashing resignedly in front of my eyes at every turn. The sun glared ever more vertically down on us, baking the wheezing Fiat Pullman in sandy haze. Chica sat rigidly beside me, scowling at anyone who made eye contact, her hand squeezing my thigh. The bus left us in the Melito Piazza, where the church clock read 11:20. I felt my blood pressure rising. Businesses would close for lunch soon, and many wouldn't reopen. We find the old man first, Chica declared, reading my mind. When you're that old, every minute counts. Okay, then I guess we ask around. We started at the Tabacchi, directly across from the market. We're looking for Dante Nazareno, I said. The youngish man behind the counter shook his head wordlessly. We tried the butcher 2 doors down, then the produce stand, where neither of the men guarding the tables nor any of the 3 shoppers had heard of Dante Nazareno. Neither had any of the men drinking coffee and smoking at the bar on the corner. Or any Nazarenos, I tried. No Nazarenos were known. Dante Nazareno, who used to arrange visas for immigrants in an office near here? No such offices were known. We persevered, heading down the alleys stemming away from the thoroughfare. We tried a shoemaker, but the shop was empty, although the door was open. We spoke to 2 women seated in front of their respective houses, turned the corner and found another bar, where no one had ever met anyone named Nazareno. I must have the wrong information, I said, feeling bad for having dragged Chica on this goose chase. Also hungry. All right, there's nothing more we can do. Let's go get some lunch. What do you say? No, Chica shouted, surprising me. My treat, I said. No eating until we find him. But Chica, how can we possibly find him when no one here has ever heard of him? You ask, Chica brandished her pointer finger and peered up at me cunningly. You ask until they remember. Back on the boulevard, there was now a hook-nosed woman behind the counter at the shoemaker. Dante Nazareno, Chica announced without any other fanfare. Alighieri, the woman corrected. No, not the writer, I started to say, but Chica spoke over me. You say Alighieri? That's what everyone calls him, the woman said to Chica. I might as well not be there. He comes down to buy vegetables every day before lunch. She pointed a scarred brown finger at the produce stand we had already visited. Thank you, senora, I called over my shoulder. Chica had already taken off. At the produce stand, Chica declared, we're looking for Alighieri. One of the shoppers, a 30-something woman, had been there the whole time. Or perhaps she'd gone away and come back. Oh, you mean Alighieri? Dante Nazareno, his real name is, she scolded me as if that were not the name I had given her the first time I asked, the name she had never in her life heard before half an hour ago. She pointed across the street at the bar where an 80-something man in a gray wool jacket was negotiating the door with a cane. That's him right there with the blue cap. Ask until they remember, Chica had said. Ask until they remember. Dante Nazareno had closed his agency in 1950, but he still owned the building. The old man shook open the blinds, then sat behind the dusty desk as if he were ready to resume his business, exactly where he left it. So tell me what you want. We're trying to track down 2 men from Santa Chionia. Santa Chionia, he said thoughtfully. I arranged visas for many men from Santa Chionia in the hard years. In the dim light coming through the vertical blinds, his thick brows cast such dark shadows that his eyes looked like holes in a skull. Many for Don Rocco Alvaro. Yes, these would probably both be under his aegis. I wrote down names and birth dates for Leo Romeo and Nico Scordo on a piece of paper Dante Nazareno handed me. Then Chica and I stole silent glances at each other for an endless 10 minutes while the old man rooted through the contents of his filing cabinets. I worried he would do himself physical harm on my account. Eventually, he lurched back to his desk with a pile of folders and opened the one on top. Here, Leo Romeo, sailed from Napoli to New York on January 26, 1920. Arrived at Ellis Island, cleared immigration, received by American agent on February 5th. There he was, Leo Romeo, Emilia Volonta's lost boy, the boy who disappeared 40 years ago, the good boy who never came home to visit his mother. The passport photo took my breath away. Leo Romeo, off to make a living doing hard labor in a foreign country, was a skinny boy with scared black eyes and a slightly blurred open mouth, as if he had not properly understood the instructions not to move for the photo shoot. This terrified lost boy, this black-eyed, helpless child, there was no way he was alive. I imagined his quivering ghost in the chair I was sitting in right there. This was the closest I would ever come to him. The dreary dust on the shelves around me pulsed in the darkening of my tears, and suddenly I saw a whole host of the lost, the men who had come to this office to stake their life on a hope and who had never been heard from again, victims of exploitation or accident or criminality or their own weaknesses. Their stories never finished because there was no one to write them. I turned my face down toward my skirt, trying to get a hold of myself. The urge to cry only increased. What's the matter, signorina? I heard Dante Nazareno say curiously. Surely you don't know this man. I shook my head, regaining control. It's just, seeing his face is very strange. I cleared my throat and scanned Leo's visa until I found an address. The same defunct Chicago one, care of Vittorio Olivieri, another dead end. Maybe Dante Nazareno could at least point me toward my next quest. Mashu, who is Vittorio Olivieri? A labor agent I worked with in Chicago. When Christians like, he peered at the folder, Leo Romeo bought a visa package. It included a job contract, the ocean liner ticket from Napoli to New York, and all the requisite paperwork. Arranged the passport and medical clearances. After 1924, I also applied for all the entry visas. When the United States tightened their immigration restrictions. Would Vittorio Olivieri have a record of where Leo lived or worked? Olivieri's gone. Dante Nazareno raised his hooded eyes, silencing me with the weight of what he left unsaid. It will be very difficult to follow that further, signorina. Chica watched me expectantly as I marshaled my fervid thoughts. The American quota system had always seemed ripe for exploitation. The man in front of me didn't look heinous or conniving, or like a kingpin who had harvested the souls of thousands of innocent men. Maybe he was just a professional who had spent his life helping other men realize their dream of prosperity abroad. Maybe I was just a terrible judge of character. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh, well, thank you both. I cannot wait for these novels to come out. This is so exciting. But there are novels here that they have written and published, and they are on this table. We always say, 3 rules of Iowa. Let's see if I get them right. Read each other, buy each other's books, and write or be written. If you don't write, other people will tell your story. If you don't buy our books, then we'll all have no books. Sign your books. So I'm sure that the authors will be very happy. The Hunger Saint is here. The 7 and 8 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna is here. And I'll move the cake and I'll stop the machine. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you. I am books. Oh, and our next reading is March
18.
18 with Janet Sylvester and Roseanne Montilla.
Oh, good.
So we
Yeah.
have your.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
good, yeah.
Oh, let me see you then. Oh, I know.
Really
Are we still
good.
we're still recording?
Live stream.